from the News Channel 5 Network, this is OpenLine.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to OpenLine. Glad you're with us tonight. It's a rainy night, and we have a very interesting topic. We are talking about the insanity plea. How common is it? How does it come about? What goes into declaring a criminal to be legally insane? And we have a guest who can help explain all of that, because this is her job. She will interview people who have been arrested for various crimes, some of whom I guess want to be considered insane, some of whom don't, and she'll make a determination and I guess report back to the judge. But I'll let her tell you all about it. It's Dr. Kimberly Brown. She is with Vanderbilt University, Associate Professor of Clinical Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences, Director of the Forensic Evaluation Team. So that's a lot. But Dr. Brown, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate this opportunity to be on and to talk to the viewers. So I'm a forensic psychologist. So I'm a clinical psychologist who's trained in the intersection of psychology and law. So most of my work in my career has been interviewing people who are charged with crimes, who are mentally ill.
And how does that come about? Does a judge say, okay, so-and-so, you need to go talk to him? Or does, I guess if somebody in court says, I'm insane, and so, you know, the defense, that's going to be my defense, a judge would say, okay, go in and make a determination. Is that right, or how does this work?
Yeah, so my role at Vanderbilt and the team that I direct, the Vanderbilt Forensic Evaluation Team, we conduct all the court-ordered forensic evaluations in Davidson County. So when there's a criminal case that arises in Davidson County and the judge has, or one of the parties has some concern about the person's mental health and how it might impact their ability to stand trial or what their condition was at the time that the crime occurred, my team does those court-ordered evaluations. So we interview people who are charged with crimes, we review their records, and ultimately we offer opinions to the court about whether we think they met the legal criteria of insanity.
How often do you find that people fake that?
Yeah, so it's a good question. There's a couple of issues that go along with that. One, I think in general, people way overestimate the number of times that people are found insane and how often this is used as a defense, first of all. So I think people think it's quite common. The reality is that it's not even raised in less than 1% of all felony cases. So for example, in our state of Tennessee, of the 250 or so thousand people that are arrested in any given year, in the last fiscal year in Tennessee, only 13 single individuals were found not guilty by reason of insanity. So it's very rare. It doesn't come up nearly as much as people think it does. So that's one of the myths of a few that I want to correct. And I think the other myth actually is kind of what you bring up, is that people are trying to kind of get one over on us, and they're trying to fake an insanity defense, and that this is kind of a common successful thing to do. I will tell you that we're always vigilant for that. That's an important issue in my job, is that we have to assess the credibility of the person that we're evaluating, and we're looking for signs of faking or exaggerating. But I'll also mention that a lot of the people we evaluate are quite mentally ill, don't want to be labeled or identified as mentally ill, and really work hard to try to hide or guard against the symptoms that they're experiencing.
Now that's very interesting. And so I'm fascinated by the numbers you just threw out there, how rare it is. Because if you watch the movies or you watch one of these TV shows, you're going to think it happens a lot. And you're saying it's incredibly rare, less than 1%.
Yes, incredibly rare. 13 people in the last fiscal year in Tennessee. And the reason it's so rare is because it doesn't mean that you're mentally ill. That's not what it means. It doesn't even mean that you're seriously mentally ill at the time of the crime. It means that you met this very specific, narrow definition of insanity that's defined by our law. And it's very hard to meet. So very few people meet that test, because it's not only that you have to have a mental illness, and that it has to be a serious mental illness, but it has to be happening at the time of the crime. It has to have caused you to do the crime, and it has to have caused you not to know the wrongfulness of your actions.
Do different states have different definitions?
Yes. And some states don't have any insanity defense. So there are a few states in our nation that don't have any insanity defense, and that's okay. That's constitutional. Most states have a definition of insanity that's pretty close to Tennessee's, and it really boils down to the person, because of their mental illness, not appreciating the nature or the wrongfulness of their conduct.
And what would you say is more common? Because you're right, again, so much of our perception of this is brought about by what we see on TV or in the movies. And you're saying it's incredibly rare, first of all, that it's even used. Then it's incredibly rare that someone would try and fool you. What's more common is that they don't want to be labeled that way. And is that right? And so how
Right.
does, if they don't want to be labeled that way, why are you doing this evaluation?
Yes. So people do try to fool us. I don't want to make it sound like that's not an issue at all. That is an issue. People do try to do that. But what we tend to see in a lot of these cases it's people who have had years and years of mental illness. They've been in and out of psychiatric facilities. They're often diagnosed with a psychotic illness like schizophrenia. Many times they go off their medication, and part of their illness is not to have insight into the fact that what they're going through is symptoms of mental illness as opposed to their reality. And so it makes it very challenging when we're interviewing them about their frame of mind at the time of the crime to get at what they were really thinking and feeling when they're trying to hide what the symptoms really were. So sometimes the people who deserve an insanity defense the most are the ones who are most difficult to get that information from, because they're very guarded and hesitant about it.
That's very interesting. And what you're also looking at is, did they understand what they were doing at the time of this crime, essentially? And,
Yes.
And it seems like that would be hard to figure out whenever you're interviewing them many months later.
Yes.
Is that a challenge?
Yes. Yes, it is a challenge. And so it's one of the reasons why we rely so much on other information, which is a little bit different than what another psychologist does outside of this setting. So the closer in time to the crime that we can interview the person, usually the better it is that we get an account of what they were actually thinking and feeling at the time. But we also rely very heavily on police reports, on witness statements, on what other people viewed at the time of the crime, how they were when they came to jail. And many times these individuals have been in treatment or been hospitalized psychiatrically around that time. So we're looking at that information as well. So it's not just relying on what the person tells us months or even maybe years later.
Now, could you give us some case studies? And maybe it's something you learned about, or maybe it's somebody that we would know locally. I mean, whatever you're allowed to do. I mean, Hinckley is a famous one, and maybe you studied that one, or most recently the Waffle House shooter. I don't know what you can say, but could you give us either one of those, take either one of those that you feel comfortable talking about, and kind of walk us through those situations?
Sure. So one of the things that I've done in my work is to develop what I've called an insanity typology, where there's different types of insanity defenses that I've described and given case examples of. And one of the most common types is paranoid protection of self. So this is the person who is paranoid, who is having what we call persecutory delusions that other people are doing things to them that aren't in fact actually happening in real life. So I think that my family has been poisoning my food. So I might stop eating things in the house, or I might only eat things that are wrapped. I might believe that someone has put a microchip in my body, and that microchip is monitoring and controlling my bodily functions and causing me pain. I might believe that I hear God speaking to me. And so, the God speaking to me is actually a different type. We'll get there. But the thoughts that people are trying to harm me and that I'm not safe and I have to do something to protect myself. Many times people who have those symptoms will react, right? They'll do something to try to protect themselves from the perceived harm that's actually delusional. So I think you're part of the Secret Service, and you've been following me, and you've been harassing me, and you've been tapping into my computer, and now you're going to come into my home and harm me. And so I have to get to you first. I have to try to stop you from doing that. So I might assault you or do something to you that would result in my being arrested. And then during the evaluation, it comes to light that this person really didn't understand what they were doing was wrong, because they believed that they were acting in self-defense in a way, that they were acting to protect themselves, and that this was an okay thing to do if you really thought that person was harming you in that way. So that's an example of a paranoid protection of self. Very common version of an insanity defense.
Very interesting. Yeah, that's fascinating. And so the Waffle House shooter, is that something we could talk about? Maybe we could take a break and talk about it coming out of the break. Or did you do you have any evaluation on him? Because here's a guy who walks into Waffle House, he's not wearing clothes, and yet he was convicted of murder. He did not get, not guilty by reason of insanity.
Right.
What about that situation?
Yeah. So my team was involved in that case. We did do the evaluation. That case obviously was publicized, gavel-to-gavel coverage on media. So there are some things I can say about it that were publicized. But the point I think you raised is a good one, which is that when a case does come, so this is another myth about the insanity defense. People think that the insanity defense is often debated by experts at a trial. It's this hotly debated, contentious issue by hired guns for each side, right? And the reality is that most of the time, insanity cases, especially in our jurisdiction, are agreed to by the prosecution and the defense. There's no arguments, there's no trial, there's no debate of experts. It's agreed to, and the person is kind of quietly found not guilty by reason of insanity. However, when we have a high-profile case like this, where each side cannot agree, and when it goes to a jury is very unlikely to find someone not guilty by reason of insanity for a charge like murder, especially multiple homicides. So the odds go down significantly when you're talking about a jury trial with such a high-profile case. Very interesting. Okay, we're going to take a break, and we'll come back and take your phone calls. That kind of sets the table for our discussion. A fascinating opportunity to call in, ask whatever you wondered about all this. We'll take a break. There's the number 615-737-PLUS, 615-737-7587. Take a break. Be back right after this.